You have cancer. 3 words that change a life forever. We would like to offer another 3 words. Be an overcomer. Welcome to the 1% Podcast, where our conversations with other cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers allows us to give you that extra boost you need to face your challenge head on, live life from a new perspective, and forge a path that keeps you moving free and clear. Now, welcome your host and cancer survivor, Truett Taylor.
Welcome to today's episode of the 1% Podcast, the show where we interview young adults who are battling or surviving an unexpected cancer diagnosis. You are not alone, and I promise, by consuming today's content, your soul will be fed with the hope, courage, and inspiration you need to keep fighting for today. I'm excited to be on your journey with you today. If you haven't done so already, be sure to head over to 1percentpodcast.com to sign up for our email list to see the latest news and updates for all our guests on the show. You can also check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1% Podcast. If you want to join in on some of our discussions, please join our Facebook group, the 1% Podcast. To contact me directly for content, questions, or booking events, you can email me at info@1percentpodcast.com. Happy New Year, everyone. Your host, Truett Taylor, here, kicking off 2019 with a brand new episode of the 1% Podcast. When the show launched back in September of 2018, I had no idea it would take off this fast and reach so many people. So, very excited for all the listeners that we've had over the past several months and all the great things we have to look forward to in 2018. We've got some brand new content on the horizon for you guys. I've been really thinking about all the feedback I've been getting from the shows, and the way it's impacting young adults who are battling or surviving cancer just lets me know the need and importance of a show like this. You're not alone. We're all in this together. We all need a community around each other to really be able to fight the toughest battles of life and share the ups and downs, and that's exactly what the podcast has been doing for people. So, as we begin a new year, I want to talk about the new you in today's 1% moment of truth. Several years ago, I worked with a guy who had lost a bunch of weight. Every day he would come into work, he could always tell he was losing a little bit of weight, and after a period of time, we looked at his wardrobe and his clothes actually didn't fit anymore. So he had his old clothes, which I'm sure were comfortable and satisfactory, but now the way he looked every day, he looked kind of dumpy and strange because his clothes were too big. It was really like those items didn't belong to him anymore. He didn't get rid of his old pants or his belt or his shirt. He just kept trying to wear the clothes that he always wore. For some reason, even though he lost all the weight, he was still wrapped up in his old identity. Hanging on to that old identity is pretty tough. I remember when I finished treatment, it was hard for me to really break loose of that cycle mentally where I was, constantly sick and worried and all those things when it came down to my life. But it kind of reminds me of a verse in the Bible that I like to go back on when Paul tells us that the old has passed away and all things are new. It's in 2 Corinthians. He's basically talking about the transformation once we come to Jesus in repentance and faith. Now, obviously, that process is a lot different than losing weight or overcoming cancer, but there's still a choice regarding our old identity. Just like my friend who his clothes were too big, or me deciding to really hold on to that old identity to be a cancer patient, even though it didn't fit me anymore and it was completely out of place. And that's just not what God desires for us. So today I encourage you, if you're struggling with all the weakness and the illness and the problems that you've had in the past, I encourage you to lay down the old self or get away from your old identity and approach your new identity as you move into 2019. In the new year, I believe you got a tremendous amount of blessings ahead of your way. You've heard me say this time and time again, but whatever you look for is what you're going to find. So I encourage you today to look for the great things, look for your new identity, leave the old identity behind, and really focus on what God's got prepared for you for the new year. All right, today's guest on the show is Sarah Debord. When I first spoke with Sarah, I was completely blown away by her perspective on life. There's several quotes inside of our interview that I've just shared with so many people. She probably doesn't even know this after the fact, but I've shared this with so many people. her perspective on life, which truly changed the way I think about living life. One of the things that she says is she doesn't worry about living a long life. She worries about living more of a deeper and wider existence every day. And just hearing her say that dramatically changed the way I view each day. So Sarah Debord was diagnosed with metastatic colon cancer at age 34. In the years since, she has turned her diagnosis into a calling and become an advocate for young adults diagnosed with colorectal cancer and parents with young families facing cancer. She works as a communications and programs manager for the Minneapolis-based Colon Cancer Coalition, volunteers her time with online parent-led support community Colon Town, and blogs about her often adventurous experiences of living with chronic cancer at coloncancerchick.com. So why don't you guys welcome Sarah Debord to the show. Hey Sarah, how you doing today?
Great.
Awesome. Glad to have you on the show. Been following some of your work recently, and you're a tremendous advocate, and I love all the stories that you post and is how well written everything is. And I know you've been doing this for a while now and stuff, but super inspiring. Can't wait to share your story with all of our listeners today. I'm sure they're going to get a tremendous amount of value for it. Why don't you tell everyone who doesn't know you like a little bit about yourself?
Okay. My name is Sarah Debord. I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, but I'm originally from California, Pasadena, which is a suburb of LA. So for me, winter is usually 65 degrees. And now I live in what I can liken to be the North Pole, winter wonderland of freezing cold Minnesota. But I was diagnosed with colon cancer when I was 34. Initially stage 3, but I had spots in my lungs that they wanted to watch, and, kind of wrote them off as lung nodules. They were too small to really investigate. I initially proceeded with treatment as a stage 3 patient, and we watched those lung mets, which eventually became large enough to biopsy. And then I was restaged about 9 months later with stage 4 metastatic colon cancer. And I have been in treatment for the last 7 years because I am inoperable. They cannot remove any of the lung nodules because they are lung mets, because there's too many of them and they're all in the wrong places. And because of the number, I also don't qualify for any radiation. So doing chemo and treatment is my only option for life at this point. And so I've been at it for 7 years and just had my 158th round of treatment on Friday.
Wow. I don't want to say congratulations, but
It is. It's, I don't want to look at it negatively. I'm very much a positive, silver lining kind of girl. So I'm just grateful to be alive. And I know I'm lucky and fortunate in that I've responded to treatment for so long, and chemo's done, miraculously what it's supposed to do. And that's kept my disease stable and kept it from spreading outside of my lungs. So I am grateful and happy to have been alive to do this for 7 years.
I love your gratitude. I can hear it in your voice as we're speaking.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for 7 years. Why do you feel like it's important for you to share your story with all of our listeners today?
Because I remember what it was like 7 years ago. I was young. I had a baby and a preschooler, and I was told I had cancer. And I remember how hopeless I felt. And I, searched the internet for any and every story I could find that somehow was like mine, that might give me hope that I could survive this disease, especially when you're told you're inoperable and you're metastatic and there's nothing else you can do but treatment. There is no hope, because all the stories I found at the time were of metastatic patients that got to the point of NED or no evidence of disease because of surgery. They had liver mets and they were able to have a liver resection or radiation, and I wasn't that person. And so I couldn't find those stories that would make me realize I could live with this disease and I could survive this disease. So I tell my story, and each year I tell it more passionately because I want that person that's diagnosed tomorrow to find it and read it and know that they have every reason to believe that they can survive this disease and they can live with this disease. It can be a chronic condition. It doesn't have to be a death sentence. So I tell it not to brag or boast, but because I know, and I recently wrote about this, that I'm the story that I wanted to find and I was looking for 7 years ago. So I tell it to give people hope, because in this day and age, we as patients have every reason to have hope.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so amazing to hear you say that. And it's almost like you're serving your purpose in a way, even though this is not the way you would have chosen things to go.
No.
How you're dealing with it is an amazing and a beautiful thing. And I love the way that you said that this is the story that you wanted to read. Whenever we are diagnosed, we all go searching the internet for some hope, I would say, or some sort of outcome, because we all worry about the future, right? And so I'm just amazed that this story is going to get into so many hands of people that need to hear it. So again, I appreciate you taking your time to do this and sharing your story. So why don't we back up a little bit and dig into your life a little bit prior to your cancer diagnosis? I'm assuming you seem like you had a fun and exciting life, just based off your personality. Why don't you tell everyone what your life was like prior to your cancer diagnosis, growing up in Pasadena, and what's going on?
Pasadena, where I did try out for the Royal Court for the Rose Parade and was not selected, but I'm not bitter. Growing up in LA, I feel like I'm a classic Southern California girl who likes to wear flip-flops and have her blonde hair and loves the ocean and the sunshine. But I started out my career in Hollywood. Wasn't my initial intention, but that's the path I ended up going down. And so my professional experience is working, on a TV commercial specifically. And I did that until I got married and got pregnant. In that order. And so I did continue to work up until the point of pregnancy, at which time I decided to be a stay-at-home mom. It was really important to me to be there for my kids those first, few years of their lives. And mainly because I didn't want to miss a moment. I didn't want, to deal with the stress of, working. The job I had was, often 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. And I knew I would not be able to balance parenthood and that job. In the devotion it took. So I opted to stay home while they were babies. And that's where I was when I was diagnosed. I had actually moved to the East Coast as well. So I was living on the East Coast, stay-at-home mom, and, found out I had cancer. And at the time, the baby was 12 months and my older son was 4 years old. So I was in an awkward position because not only was I not working, I was staying at home. I didn't have the option of disability, which a lot of people I know in treatment take. So I was left on my own. There was no backup plan for taking care of my kids because that was my job. So it was definitely a tricky situation after my diagnosis. But and it left me in an odd place because when I decided I wanted to go back to work, once my disease was stable and my kids were older, it's kind of hard to find a job in the normal world, so to speak, when your background is in Hollywood.
Right.
Yeah.
So take us to the day you got diagnosed. Obviously, it was unexpected. What kind of signs or symptoms were you having prior to your diagnosis?
For about 10 years prior to my diagnosis, had blood in my stool. At the time in LA, I was living with my best friend who's a physician's assistant. And I remember I was about 24 years old and I came out of the bathroom one day after pooping. And I said to her, when I poop, there's blood in my poop. Is that normal? And she quickly said, that's definitely not normal and I should get it checked out. So at 24, I had amazing insurance. And I called up a gastroenterologist and was able to get right in and met with him. At the time I met with him, though, I did not know my family history, which is something we really stress in the colorectal cancer world, is knowing your family history because it does put you at risk for the disease. And so when I met with him, I gave him a little bit of the history I knew, and he performed a flex sigmoidoscopy on me and didn't find any source of bleeding, told me it was probably just hemorrhoids. I was so excited that I could see inside my body while I was awake. And I didn't know what a hemorrhoid was, that I said, show me. I mean, I want to see a hemorrhoid. I don't even know what one is. And he said, well, I don't see any, but that's probably what it is. And he sent me on my way. So for the next 10 years, anytime I saw blood in my stool, which for me was multiple times a week, I just wrote it off and said, must be those hemorrhoids I don't have. And so I excused that because a doctor himself had excused it. About about 4 years before I was diagnosed, my maternal aunt was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer when she was 51, which was unexpected. And that was a second opportunity for a doctor to say, hey, your family is at risk for this disease. It's unlikely for somebody to be diagnosed at 51. Everybody in your family needs to be screened or talk to their doctor about family history and on-time screening for them. And then I moved on a few years later after my second son was born. I continued to have blood in my stool this entire time. And at the end of that pregnancy, I found myself extremely anemic. And to the point the obstetrician did not want to discharge me from the hospital after he was born because I was just so anemic. And I remember the obstetrician sitting down in the recliner that they save for dads. Usually the dads sleep in. And I found the bedside manner to be kind of odd because he himself sat in that recliner and kind of leaned back and hoed and hummed and sighed and looked at my paperwork and said, I really want to discharge you, but you're really anemic, and he kind of tousled back and forth and said, I think they mixed this blood work up with the girl next door. And at the time, it didn't really raise red flags because I wanted to get out of the hospital. And in retrospect, I realized I was still accessed. He could have simply said, hey, let's hang on another 3 hours. I'm going to run your labs again just to make sure this isn't your lab work. You could have said, hey, at your 6-week follow-up, postpartum checkup, let's do labs again just to make sure your blood work's normal. And he didn't do any of that. He discharged me and sent me on my way. And it was about 6 months after that not only did the blood in my stool increase, I lost all my baby weight very quickly and continued to lose weight and got below what I would call my normal adult weight. And I started to be very tired all the time, not just tired, fatigued. And I had my bowel habits changed. And all of those things were easily written off by my lifestyle. I was training for a half marathon. So I was running a lot. I was circuit training, and I had, the kids in the jogger. So of course I was tired. I was getting up 5 times a night to nurse a baby and, all doing all this running and all this working out. So of course I was so tired by dinner time. I could barely stand up. And the blood in my stool, I actually had a big giant baby. So of course I now had hemorrhoids. So of course there's blood in my stool. And the weight loss, I was nursing and running. So I thought, well, of course I'm losing weight like crazy because I'm running and nursing. And this is awesome because I'm eating French fries and drinking milkshakes multiple times a week and losing weight. But what really got my attention to the point where I did seek out medical care was the change in bowel habits. It became very disruptive to my life. Mm-hmm. It was taking me multiple trips to the bathroom in the morning to feel emptied out enough that I could leave the house or go for a run. And on the East Coast in July, you want to run at 6 o'clock in the morning. You don't want to run at 11 o'clock in the morning because of the heat and humidity. And I was finding I couldn't get out of the house to run until noon some days, which is ridiculous there with the temperatures and the humidity. So that became so disruptive. And I was literally going through a roll of toilet paper a day that I finally did go into the doctor or into urgent care. And at the time I was so tired and fatigued. The baby, I remember letting him crawl around the floor of urgent care, which is probably one of the most disgusting places, there is. And I didn't have the energy to even hold him on my lap. And so I remember sitting there, leaning against the wall, sitting in a chair, waiting and watching the baby crawl around the floor and pull himself up on tables and chairs. And, just thinking, this is so disgusting, but I literally can't hold him because I was so tired. And, unfortunate, for me, it took that long for me to finally go in to the doctor. But the telltale signs to me, all the classic signs were there that, for 10 years that something wasn't right with my body, coupled with the family history. When I finally did get to the gastroenterologist and was filling out paperwork, I asked my mother about her family history and her personal history, because I know she has a lot of autoimmune disorders, including celiac disease. So she has a personal relationship with her gastroenterologist. And she told me casually that when she was 40, she had a precancerous polyp removed. And I didn't realize at the time what, red flags those were, with my aunt having the disease at 51 and my mother having the precancerous polyp removed at 40, that I should have been screened. My whole family should have been screened, much sooner than we actually were.
Yeah. And
the truth is, I would have had the disease had I been screened when I should have been, which based on her history would have probably been age 30. Mm-hmm. So, we would have caught the disease, but we would have caught it much earlier than when it was.
I think that's an important thing to bring up lots of times. And it's something, I was diagnosed when I was 31. So whenever you're diagnosed, typically if you have children or something like that, you start looking 10 years before you were diagnosed. I think that's an important point to bring up. So you brought up a couple of things of two different doctors that kind of wrote it off because of your lifestyle, and you wrote it off because of your lifestyle and having a baby and everything as well too. But now that you look back on it and you kind of put all the pieces together, all the signs were there for something different. But that's what we do in life, especially in the type of career that you were in, where you were going, you said, 18 hours a day, lots of times, 7 days a week. You can miss those things if we don't stop and slow down and you really kind of pay attention, because especially people like you that are super driven. I'm the same way. It's easy for us to ignore all the things that we consider insignificant and really are just driving towards goals and things like that. So it's really easy to do that. So whenever you were diagnosed, what kind of treatment did they put you on?
Because I had what I would call standard case of colon cancer. I had, I think it was a 7-centimeter mass in my sigmoid colon. And so they were able to do just a straight colon resection. They took out 10 inches of my sigmoid colon, stitched me back together. My colorectal surgeon said, I'll have you pooping like a 21-year-old in a few days, no problem. And at the time I was like, what is he talking about? But he wasn't kidding. Just a few days after the surgery, everything was, back to working order and better than it ever was. And I am one of the fortunate people that have no repercussions from that surgery. I poop like a champ. I poop like that 21-year-old. So I don't have any GI issues from it, which is great. About 6 weeks after I had the surgery, I did start on the standard therapy for stage 3 and below colorectal cancers, which is FOLFOX. And they prescribed me the initial 12 rounds. While we watch those mysterious lung nodules that were so tiny and probably nothing, let's just go ahead and treat you like stage 3. And so I did those first 12 rounds of FOLFOX. And then once I got off those, we kind of took the wait and see approach. But the lung mets immediately started growing. But we did what I like to call in cancer the worst part, which is hurry up and wait. Yeah. So we did the whole watch and wait thing on the lung mets until they did grow enough that could be confirmed to be metastatic, and then I switched up treatment plans.
So as you're going through all the chemo, you've got a brand new child. You said you weren't working at the time you were getting chemo. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's a lot of stressors all at once, some natural stressors and some that you didn't expect as far as the cancer diagnosis. From an emotional standpoint, what do you think that was doing to you emotionally to have to deal with that each day?
I honestly didn't think I could get through the first 12 rounds. I mean, it was brutal. I know now it's because I didn't have an amazing anti-nausea drug called Amend, which I've had subsequent. So for me, it was just, I didn't think I had the strength to get through it. It's mental torture, for lack of a better word. And I was dealing with anxiety for the first time in my life, which I didn't even know was an anxiety at the time. But, to knowingly walk into a building and make yourself sick every other week does a number on you. And so for me, it was just getting through each round. I wasn't looking at the big picture. I was trying to say, if I can just get through this weekend of being sick, I know next week I'll be normal and I can pretend to be normal and be with my kids and be healthy, so to speak. But it was physical, but it was, I think, more emotional and mental for me than getting through the physical aspects of it.
Isn't it crazy to think that you're walking into a room where you're about to get poisoned and you're okay with it and you're allowing it to happen? That's kind of weird. Yeah. Not normal.
I think that's why the anxiety kicked in. And I've written about this very recently too. By the third round, I was dry heaving in the parking lot before I walked in, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. Like, why does my body want to throw up? And I don't have any chemo in me. And my nurse finally, explained to me that that was anxiety. Like my body did not, and my mind did not want to walk in that building and put that into my body, knowing I was going to walk out feeling like crap, for lack of a better word. It's like, why would you willingly make yourself sick? And so that's where that the whole mental and emotional challenge came into it. Is physically I could do it, and I knew physically I could get through it. It was the emotional and the mental struggle of doing that to yourself.
It's like you go to get treatment to cure yourself physically, but at the same time, you're not really doing much mentally. And I think that's a thing that we tend to neglect lots of times, especially for me. Whenever I got finished, I got better physically a lot faster than I did emotionally. It took me so long to just laugh again and enjoy people and enjoy things. Did you find that started to have an effect on your relationships with your family or with your friends or with your children?
I think with my kids, I made the most of it when I felt well, and I learned to parent from wherever I was. I was fortunate that my mother-in-law was able to move in with us the first year because the baby was still very much a baby who needed, round the clock care and 2 naps a day and the diapers and needed to be fed. So she was instrumental in helping us get through that first year and taking that pressure off me. But at the same time, there was still a lot of guilt and pressure I put on myself because I wasn't able to be there for my kids. I chose to be a stay-at-home mom because I didn't want to miss a moment of their lives. And now all of a sudden, cancer was forcing me to miss moments. And so that was my own struggle that I had to accept. You have to parent from wherever you are. And if that means you're in bed and your kids crawl in bed with you, if that means you don't have the energy to get off the couch and you just snuggle up and, put on a kid's TV show and you take a nap while they're cuddled up with you, so be it. So I think I worked through the emotions of the parenting loss. My marriage itself, I had been struggling with for a long time, just keeping it to myself. And when I was diagnosed, I thought that the diagnosis itself might be this magical catalyst that would, I don't know how to put it. It would strengthen my marriage because I felt personally very detached and was struggling just in the relationship. And I thought that cancer would finally be this thing that just, made my marriage what I thought it should be and that relationship what I thought it should be. And I tried very hard in the beginning to force that. But as treatments went on, and as, within the first 18 months, I realized this wasn't going to kill me. I was going to live, but I was still very unhappy in my marriage, that I needed to make changes, which is something I really advocate for, not changing your marriage, but being happy. Right. And I was very unhappy. And the stress of that unhappiness in my marriage was not helping my illness and was not helping me, maximize who I was. You want to remove those stressors from your life when you're facing cancer because it's not going to help you fight the disease. And for me, this was a big stressor just in my day-to-day life. And so I know that relationship ultimately succumbed to the disease in a good and a bad way. There's a lot of good that's come out of it, I will say. But, at the time it seemed, not the best time to be ending a marriage. But in the end, it was for the best. And then I noticed, and I would say this with friendships, if I had to give a little bit of advice to someone newly diagnosed, is your friendships are going to change, and don't be shocked if people you consider to be some of your best friends walk away from you, and people that were on the outskirts of your life that you might have considered associates, all of a sudden are on your doorstep there to help you. And so I think it wasn't just the parental relationship, the marital relationship. I think there's definitely friendships I had, some that kind of dissipated after the cancer diagnosis. And then there are friends that were in my peripheral that all of a sudden, were literally there with the phone calls, with the food, with the coffee, with the, let me give you a ride. Let me, come over and hang out at my house and I'll watch your kids while you rest. Just, the amazing outpouring from people that I would have not considered close friends prior to my diagnosis.
Why do you think that is? Same thing happened to me. Why do you think some people run away?
Well, I have this analogy I use, and it kind of goes with our cell phone. The age of cell phones and cameras is, if you ever notice a car accident or a fire, there are people that naturally, as soon as they see it, run into the fire or run into the airport or to the accident. Sorry. And then there are the people that whip out their phones and just take video. And I've witnessed a few accidents. And in fact, I was coming back from vacation with my ex-husband when we witnessed an accident right in front of us, and a car flipped over. And I immediately pulled over and I started barking orders at him. I'm like, you call 911, you do this, I'm going to run, do that, you know. And afterwards he said he was amazed because he froze. He did not know what to do.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I snapped him out of it. And I immediately assessed the situation and started, you know, telling him what to do. And we need to do this, this, and this. And I took control of the situation. And he helped the people get out of the car because it was still upside down. And I realized, you know, kind of from that experience, that there are the people that freeze or whip out their cell phone. And then there are the people that run into the fire and try and help. And I think you don't know what you are until you're presented with that situation. And I think it applies to friendships. Is you have those friends and family, I'm going to lump family in there too, that when you're diagnosed with cancer, they're the people that freeze, or the people that whip out their cell phone and just watch from the sideline. They don't know what to do. And then there's going to be those friends, it could be total strangers, who their first instinct is to run into the fire and help. And I think it applies to those accident situations, but I think it applies to illness as well.
Yep.
It's just, and I don't know what it is about us, if it's in our DNA, if it's our temperament, but if it's the way we were raised. But I think it's just some people naturally run into the tragedy to try and help. And that's what I find with cancer.
What would you say to someone listening right now who maybe has a friend that has decided to take a back seat? Like I said, I've talked to several people about this situation, and sometimes people just can't deal with the fact that you may be sick, or maybe they have had an experience in their life where someone that got sick passed away, and they can't watch their best friend, you know, go through the sickness and diminish and die, and all the thoughts, it becomes about them, in my opinion, and they just kind of run away. What would you say to someone who's listening today that maybe has a friend or family member who's kind of decided to check out a little bit now that they're sick?
I think you have to let it go. You know, what you're dealing with is a heavy enough burden. Taking on the burden of a failed friendship or the disappointment of friends or family who aren't there, harboring that anger or that disappointment is not going to help you fight the disease. And instead of looking back at those people and wondering why they aren't stepping up, why they aren't helping out, look around and open your eyes and see who is, and focus on those relationships. I mean, I was amazed at who didn't step up and who wasn't running into my fire. But I was amazed at the total strangers that did.
Right.
And those are the relationships I focused on. And I found those people, you know, some of them are still so near and dear to me and still check in on me pretty regularly. And, you know, focus on what is happening, what isn't happening, than what isn't happening. So it's, I mean, I hate to say it because I know it can apply to family as well, for some people, but you just love your friends and family for who they are, and don't be angry or disappointed at what they aren't.
Right. I think you have a limited amount of strength anyways, and you're fighting for yourself. When you try to fight for a friendship that someone just kind of walked out, you don't really, it's not really a priority at the moment. So you shouldn't feel that responsibility to run after someone and try to bring them back in when they decide to check out for a moment. So
exactly. Like, you like you're saying, you have such limited bandwidth.
Yeah.
At that time, don't waste any of it on somebody who isn't, you know, doing their part. But instead focus on the people that are.
So you've had 158 treatments.
Yes.
Over the past 7 years.
Yes.
What's been your lowest moment so far? When were you at your absolute lowest?
I would say at the end of my second year, I was on the second regimen for colorectal cancer, which is called FOLFIRI. And one of the drugs in that combination is called irinotecan, and it's a brutal drug. I'm not going to lie. Though I didn't get as physically sick, I never threw up. My nausea was always maintained. It is a drug that causes your hair to thin, so inevitably you do have to shave your head. And it's called irinotecan, but it's called within our community, jokingly, I run to the can. because it's notorious for diarrhea and destroying your gut. And I was pretty bad off because I had very long blonde hair that eventually I had to shave off. I lost weight, partly because of the nausea and lack of appetite, partly because I was running to the can a lot. And I, for once, looked like a cancer patient. I was very underweight. I was bald. I was, I had no eyebrows and no eyelashes, and I just looked sickly. And I didn't have the energy to stand up. Most nights was so exhausted. I was reading my kids their books, before bed. And, some nights I could just say, hey, kids, can we just do one book tonight? Because I'm so fatigued and I just want to crawl into bed. And I think that was physically my lowest in all of the 7 years because of just how sick I was and how, I was the quintessential chemo patient at that point. And, still dealing with 2 little kids and, a baby in diapers and, all the usual mom stuff. But I think I'm a very physical, active, healthy person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, I was running and I was working out and I was probably the fittest I'd ever been when I was diagnosed. And to see me go from that to so thin that I needed a belt to hold up like my size 0 shorts from the juniors department, and weak that I could barely stand up, and carry the baby around, and in pain because, I'm going to tell you, when you go to the bathroom a lot, I could barely sit down, for lack of a better description, so I was physically in pain. I was physically weak. I was thin. I was nauseated, and I was sickly. And that's emotionally and mentally a hard place to be when you are used to being strong and tough and fit and able to do so many things. I was this strong mommy, and my kids my kids grew up in a jogger, knowing mommy to go for runs and to work out and do her planks and all this stuff. And now they were seeing a mommy that could barely get up off the floor. So I think in all the years, that's probably one of my lowest, is just being so physically run down and pushed down by just chemo.
There's something about brokenness that, again, you and I are similar in a lot of ways, just by listening to you talk, that the driven people, we're stubborn people as well too. I can admit that. I don't know if you can admit that, but I'm sure you can. But we're stubborn in every way. I would say we're stubborn when it comes to being sick, to doing too much, to all those things. Like, cancer's not going to beat me. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Like, so we're real. But when we get broken, I think it's almost at a deeper level in a way, where some people may be broken a little bit earlier. Like, when we get to the point that we're finally broken, that's pretty serious, I would say. Yeah. And at that moment, when your identity is just completely slipping away from you, because I take a lot of pride in everything that I'm responsible for or capable of. And if that's me fighting, if that's me bringing awareness or whatever it is, like I take a lot of pride and a lot of responsibility in that. And I don't complain and I don't do anything like that. But when it gets to the point where I'm at my lowest with that, then I know that again, it's probably a personality trait of us. It's not so easy to ask for help, I would say, in a lot of ways, because we're so used to being the ones running into the fire, right?
Yeah.
So when you get to your lowest point, like, what did you do to really kind of take that hard right turn and get out of that point? What was it that helped you? What was it that, or who was it, or what really motivated you to just give you that little boost that you needed to get some strength back and then continue to grow and stay strong?
I think you talk about being completely broken. I remember the day we were in between moving from the East Coast to the Twin Cities, and I was alone. I had stayed back to finish my treatments and sell the house, and it was just me and the kids by ourselves. And it's the first time my oldest son saw me cry because I was so physically weak and sick. I needed to take him to preschool, and I think I had finished treatment, my first 12 rounds at that point, but I physically couldn't walk out the door. And we talk about being tough, and I take care of myself and I do it myself. And that morning I was crumpled up on the dining room floor crying because I didn't have the strength to walk out the door and drive him to preschool. And I remember I called my parents, who lived right down the beach from us. And asked my stepmother if she could come pick him up and take him to school for me, because I could not do that. And it sounds simple, just getting in the car and taking your kids to preschool, but it was so physically hard for me to do that. I gave up, I gave up the ghost on that one. That was probably the first time I really broke down. My 4-year-old saw me cry, came in and asked why I was crying. And I was like sitting on the cold tile of the dining room floor going, I literally am so sick, I can't even do that. So my stepmother came and got him and took him. And at that point, I had finished the first 12 rounds of Full Fury, and I did have a break coming up. So I think the way I was able to get anything back was just taking a physical break from treatment.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to anyway, because I was so underweight. I needed to gain weight. And it was nice to have a few months off where I was able to grow a little bit of hair and gain a little bit of weight and just be normal. I think when we're in treatment and we have cancer, we're not normal. You're never normal when you have cancer, but it always does the spirit and the soul and the mind good to at least pretend to be normal for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a couple of months where I took a break while we were moving and was able to pretend to be normal. And that really restored me in a big way. A change of environment. I changed treatment centers, and just having that break. I did continue to do chemo, but a lesser chemo, just a pump, the 5FU pump I did for a few months while I kind of healed myself mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Is that something that you requested?
Yes. I could have immediately moved and gotten back on Full Fury, but I think I just needed the emotional break.
Yeah.
I had been so physically torn down. I wasn't ready to go back there yet. And so I did take a break for a few months, just do the pump, and was able to build my strength back up a little bit and feel normal for a while, which helped before I started back up again. So I've always been in control of my treatment. I advise anybody to be their own advocate and understand their disease and treatment options. And part of that is you driving your treatment plan and you dictating what happens. And I fortunately have oncologists that have always respected my opinion and what I want to do and have listened to me. And so I dictated when I wanted to stop, when I wanted to take a break, when I wanted to do maintenance, and when I was ready to start back up on the tough stuff again.
So I think you bring up a really good point, and I hear this from a lot of people who tend to deal with chemo and cancer the best is being your own advocate. I think when you first get the news, you're so scared, you're going to say, hey, I'll do whatever it takes, whatever kind of drugs you guys want to give me. I'll go ahead and take all those and do whatever I have to do to get rid of this. But no one knows your body more than you. And being self-aware, I think being self-aware mentally, emotionally, and even physically is such a powerful thing to have. And, the fact that you were able to do that, kudos to you for saying, hey, I need a break and, really get a chance to gain some strength, get your foundation back because it was starting to diminish. And so I think that's something that a lot of people definitely need to do.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give a young adult who's listening right now, I know you've given a lot already, who may be experiencing, a tough time in their journey, or may have been just diagnosed, or even something too, like you've been doing this for a while. So you've been around a lot of people, like maybe some caregivers, people tend to forget the caregivers lots of times as well. But, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's experiencing cancer right now?
I think my one lesson or motto that has emerged out of my diagnosis is be happy. I think a lot of us put up with a lot of toxic things in our lives or things we don't like, be it your job, be it, where you live, be it your relationships, be it a romantic relationship or family relationships. And in order to fight this disease, you have to focus everything you have on it. And if you have something in your life that is sucking emotional, physical, mental energy out of you, it needs to go. Because you need to devote all your bandwidth to fighting this disease. And obviously not all of us have amazing family relationships, and you can't exactly cut those out completely. But, I think you need to put boundaries around yourself when it comes to toxic relationships, to keep them at arm's length while you're fighting the disease. And if there's things in your life that you don't like, change them. If you aren't happy with your career, change it. I obviously, again, I'm not advising this, but I had a marriage that I was struggling with to the point that it was broken, and I changed it, and it has turned out for the better because of it. I have an amazing relationship with my former husband. But I often, I say book the vacation. Don't just talk about doing things, do it. Don't talk about how much you hate your job, change it. Don't talk about how much you wish you live in another state, move. Don't look at that desktop photo of that amazing Caribbean beach. Book the vacation. Life is too short to be miserable. And, as much as it might pain you initially, it's like ripping off the Band-Aid. I think your life will be better for it if you take the toxicity out, or at least limit it, so that you can devote more energy to your personal happiness, your personal well-being, and fighting the disease, because the disease is all the toxicity you need. And the more energy you can devote to fighting it, to making it through each week, to being as normal as you can be, the better you're going to be, the better the outcome of your disease is going to be. It may not end well, but at least the time that you have is going to be better spent. And, life is too short to be miserable. That's all I can say.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
So one of the last questions I have for you is, and it's all about perspective, and I know you'll be able to answer this question in a really great way, but what's the best thing that cancer has done for your life?
Well, silver lining cloud.
Right.
I know it sounds weird, but cancer has changed the trajectory of my life for the better. And it has given me purpose and drive and a career and things that I didn't know I was ever going to find again, especially when I left LA and left Hollywood. I did try and find a job on the East Coast, and it was difficult for me to find anybody who would want to hire me based on my past experience, because Hollywood doesn't translate into the regular working world. And I didn't know I knew I'd need to reinvent myself in some way once I went back to work. And I just never knew what that was going to be. And I didn't think I'd be able to find a job that was as exciting as what I'd done before. When I was doing and seeing the things I was doing in LA, that isn't necessarily going to be an exciting job like that, anywhere else. But the ultimate thing that came out of cancer for me was a job and a passion and a vocation and a calling that I didn't even know was there until my diagnosis. And I eat, breathe, live, sleep, work, everything cancer now. And I hate to say I love it, but I do. And for me, I think that's the greatest thing to come out of all of this, is that I go to bed happy every night. Yeah. And, when I was working in LA, a lot of money gets spent on making TV commercials, and I remember I go to bed every night after a commercial, and all the yelling and the screaming and the money and the checks. And I would think, all that money for something people are just going to fast forward through or skip over or not even watch. All that money I always felt was wasted on a product that really didn't have meaning and matter. And now I work in the nonprofit sector and see the work being done, just throughout the organization I work for. And I'm amazed at, what little bit of money goes such a long way to making a difference in people's lives. And I even know, I make a fraction of what I used to make, but I go to bed happy every night. There's something so satisfying for me. If I can just talk to one person a day and, give them hope or give them advice or comfort them, it gives me a peace and a purpose that I never knew I could have. And to me, that's a gift. And to say that cancer gave that to me, I know it sounds hard and harsh, and some people wouldn't agree with that, but it's definitely an amazing thing that has come out of this.
I love your mindset. Doing what you're called to do when you're called to do it. There's really nothing more peaceful than that. No matter how ugly the circumstances might be, the very fact that you said you go to bed happier now that you've had 158 rounds of treatment versus before then when you weren't. So I think that says a lot about you. So why don't you tell our listeners how they can connect with you? I know you have, you're involved in a ton of different things, but tell us about your blog, your site, and all the things that you're a part of.
When I was first diagnosed, I started a blog called coloncancerchick.com. I have colon cancer and I'm from LA, so I'm a chick. You're either a dude or a chick. So I thought, the title of the blog kind of summed up who I was as a California girl. So I blog there. I also write for Cure magazine, so curetoday.com. I'm one of their contributors. I'm on Facebook, Sarah Debord. Won't be hard to find me. I'm on Twitter at the Sarah Debord and on Instagram at the Sarah Debord. I also am a patient leader in Colontown. I specifically head up their parenting group. And Colontown is an online patient caregiver, patient-led support group. It's a pretty amazing organization, an amazing group of people. And I work for the Colon Cancer Coalition here in the Twin Cities, which is a national nonprofit that raises colorectal cancer awareness and screening. We promote and fund screening programs around the country. I'm trying to think, where else am I? I feel like I'm all over.
Jobs, yeah.
Yeah. So, not too hard to track down if you Google me. You could find me, but I'm an open book, and I'm happy to help or talk to anybody that wants to reach out. Well,
I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you and your story and your perspective, your vision, all of your advocacy, your attitude. There's just so much gratitude that comes from you and the way you express yourself and you share your story and all the things that you're a part of. Really, I mean, you're as authentic and as real as it gets, I would say. And just hearing your story, I can only imagine the impact it's going to have on all the people that are listening. And so whenever I launch this episode, you get expected to hear a bunch of love and everything coming your way because of this. So Sarah, you're absolutely amazing. Everything about you. You have a beautiful soul, and I'm so glad that your story is going to be in the ears of so many people today. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you for taking time to be on the show. And I'm going to drop all of your information in the show notes, and people can check out all of your blogs and have a lot of new Facebook, Instagram friends, things like that. And
awesome.
Be a part of all the communities and stuff. So Sarah, I appreciate you being a guest on the show, and we will catch up with you soon. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me.
We appreciate you spending time with us on today's episode and encourage you to continue the conversation to help you keep pushing forward. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as ways to recommend a guest and connect to Truett personally, head over to 1%podcast.com. Be sure to join us next time for more stories of inspiration right here with Truett Taylor on the 1% Podcast.